Memory of Chaos. Let's talk. I'm going to be giving you general team recommendations and general advice for approaching this. I'm not going to give you an exact team you should be using because I understand you may not have characters like me and you may not have them built, and I don't want you to invest in a character specifically just to clear Memory of Chaos. Being blunt, a lot of the Memory of Chaos that I've completed and a lot of the ones you're seeing others complete are either due to high investments or extremely good gear. And if you're talking about relics, let's all be honest here, it's very difficult to get a great one. Some units will perform far better than others. If you have a Clara, if you have a Yanqing, if you have another Shielder, whether that's Japard, maybe you got a Locha or a Bailu or Natasha, whatever the case may be, if you have multiple survival units, you can push further than others. So if you're this early on in the game, please don't look at this as you need to be able to or should be able to right now. Instead, look at it as you will be able to later on. Just try to learn your teams and learn who needs what. For full transparency and disclosure, a lot of the individuals I personally used early on were individuals like my Silverwolf. You see she has a light cone, she's now E6. Zile, she's E2 with her light cone, that's on Yanqing right now. I had a Bailu, so I could push further into content. I got a Japard much later on. Even though he doesn't have his light cone, I still got him. So I just want to be clear, these are the units I had. I'm not saying these are required. By no means am I saying these are required. I just want to be transparent with I had. For the first few stages, Memory of Chaos 1 through 5, you're dealing with groups of smaller mob enemies. Stages 1 here, you have a big boss, and yeah, sure, they are difficult, but you're dealing with 2 sections of them. So essentially this is 4 groups. This is 2 and 2, and then 2 and 2. So what you're dealing with here is you need to prepare for either both bosses with physical in the first stage or quantum, or try and bring a Silverwolf or anyone else who can assist you in simply breaking the weaknesses of that enemy. If you have a DPS, maybe your Clara is your DPS, maybe you have a Dan Heng, you should build and bring out a character who can apply either one of the weak elements like a March 7th, or you should understand that you don't need to 3-star these. You just need to clear these first to get on later. And by this I mean, you don't need to 3-star every one of these chambers. Instead, my recommendation would be just complete them to move on to the next, just to see where your account stands, and then you can obviously go back at any point in time and clear it again. For this section of Memory Chaos, it's prioritizing debuff. This is why Silverwolf is great. This is why any Nihility character is going to be amazing. Pela is going to be great for reducing defenses further down. Once you hit Memory of Chaos stage 6, the entire order of everything after changes. By this I mean, you are not facing off against 2 separate boss mobs. Instead, you're facing off against one mob. In this instance, let's look at the deer. The deer is a final mob you're facing off against. You need to get through everything else first. These twigs are what it summons, whereas these little dragonfish are what the giant gatekeeper summons. So you're facing off against a boss rush, essentially. What you're dealing with, and the biggest issue on this section, is going to be the deer. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to show you exactly how to clear stage 6. Because you're facing off against one singular boss mob, as an example of the first side, you can use all your buffs beforehand in the event that you really want to ensure you're going to have a good start. Your main goal is to get to the end boss as quickly as possible. One thing to keep in mind, if you don't want to use multiple healers, but you do have multiple Nihility characters of the same element, there are 2 specific weakness breaks I can recommend. This being either imprisonment from your imaginary characters like Yukong or Welt, or maybe even Locha, or entanglement. If you have entanglement on your quantum characters, it not only delays an action, but multiplies damage by the amount of times an enemy is hit. Now, for big boss sections like these ones, you always want to attack the one on the right. The one on the right will always tend to be the more aggressive one, especially if they have debuffs. An example is in Memory of Chaos floor 9, you have Cocolia and a large frost-based enemy. The frost-based enemy, despite being less, I suppose, powerful or less threatening than Cocolia, does have the ability to do wide AoE attacks. You can actually use this to segment off your team. If your 2 enemies or 2 of your characters, or even I'd say 3, are essentially better against one boss, you want to use them to break and attack that boss, whereas your support, maybe it's your Bailu or your Natasha or anyone else, can be used to break the others, just to slowly help with your survival rates. This second half is where the difficulty kicks in, specifically because the deer actually has the ability to essentially heal itself and enrage your team. Now, if you don't know about enrage, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of it. It sucks. It is god awful. Now, for the big boss, the first thing you're going to notice is it has 2 separate health bars. This means you need to deplete it once and then deplete it again. Now, the biggest issue I think for a lot of players is they're going to focus down the smaller mobs it summons, and that is a good thing to do sometimes. The only issue you're facing off against is when it summons a smaller mob, some of them will have the ability to enrage, essentially reducing. When it summons those smaller mobs, it has the ability to enrage your teammates. And what this means is that you essentially will lose control of a teammate and they will continuously attack whatever the game feels like it will. This means it could attack the boss, it could attack an random enemy that you didn't care about. So your biggest advice I can give you is to just focus down the boss. If you can focus down the boss and stop its bigger attacks, you should be relatively speaking fine. An example, Outrage. It might deal minor wind damage, but the Outrage effect is what's going to stop you because it can do this to any character. And this means your healer may be unable to heal because you've lost control over them. Think about it like Kafka's domination. If you lose control of a character, especially if that character is integral, you lose the fight. So it's a balancing act. You can either focus on the big boss to prevent it from summoning these, or focus down these so that way you don't lose. I choose to focus on the boss. And as you see here, it outraged my Silver Wolf. This means I've lost complete and utter control over her. So she's going to attack anything. This is where having a shielder and a healer comes in handy, because if you can't use it beforehand, you might be in a spot of trouble. And as you see here, we defeated the boss before it was able to summon more of them. The second stage is where things kind of become a little bit more ridiculous. Now, I'm using Benediction on my Silver Wolf just because she is capable of being a DPS, and as of right now, she is a really good one. But I recommend just keeping it on your DPS or saving it for your healer when you need an emergency heal. And as you see, my healer is now outraged. This means that my entire survivability depends just on me being able to outdamage the boss for now, because my Bailu also won't be able to revive. But as you see here, we were able to complete it. Your biggest threat later on won't necessarily just be the bosses, it will instead be the debuffs they can apply. Outrage is an incredibly difficult debuff to deal with. But let's talk about the other stages. Stage 7 is a standard fair boss, nothing too ridiculous. You're not dealing with Svarog, you're dealing with the hands. Realistically, these hands I would actually use to take out first, because the AoE explosion they have can weaken other enemies. For stage 8, you're dealing with this enemy. For Disciples, my primary recommendation is, you either better have high enough damage to outdamage the big boss, or take out any smaller mobs it summons. This is because these big Disciples heal whenever they land a hit on you. So either you freeze them, imprison them, or entangle them. You need to have some way to reduce them from taking turns. Imprisonment works great with Welts, with Yukong, with Locha, with any character who can. Freeze is great if you have a March 7th, a Japard, a Yanqing, but the secondary stage is perfectly fine. Standard fair boss. 9 took me 2 days to get through myself. Now here's your issue. That first half. Cocolia is 10 times easier than the first half. This boss is god-awful. This boss it's one singular boss. First you're facing off against him one time, then you're facing off against him in tandem with this Stormbringer. Ignore the Stormbringer, don't care about it, it's not your threat right now. Your threat is this guy. This individual boss enemy here will summon up to 4 other smaller mobs. These smaller mobs can inflict a ton of wind shear damage onto you, about 15 stacks. For those who don't know, that is enough to entirely destroy a Japard shield the moment it activates. Because these are static, these will stick onto you no matter what. You might be inclined to bring somebody who can cleanse, whether that's Natasha or March 7th or Locha. Your issue with this is, you either need to be able to survive, or be able to ignore it. You cannot cleanse this when there are 4 to 5 enemies who will repeatedly attack each and every teammate on your side. My teams ended up being this. The first team you saw for stage 6 is my team now. That is the team I ran because I realized it is far easier to stop the big boss from taking turns than it is to handle the enemies. In this instance, your threat is either one of 2 things. These guys from destroying you with damage over time, or this guy, because he heals about 6,000 times, 6,000 HP based on the number of enemies still alive. So you're inclined to imprison him and then use everyone else to take out all 4 of these guys. You don't need to kill them. You need to take them out once. That way they don't have the revive effect anymore. If they have the revive effect, he will heal, and he comes back for the second half when you're dealing with this. So this means that this boss here can take away all your turns. He is your biggest threat. When you get down here, Cocolia, she's just okay. She's there. She's not your big threat. Yes, she has a bunch of resistances, and yes, she can do a bunch of damage, and she can immediately freeze one character, but ironically enough, she's the easier stage. So once again, I would say this. If you are incapable of clearing it just with raw damage, and you don't have a individual who can heal you or keep you alive like a Japard, my recommendation is to instead focus on stopping the enemy from taking turns. Imprisonment works well with any character who's imaginary. If you don't have imprisonment, you can use freeze. Everybody has March 7th, get her out, use her. If you don't want to go with March 7th, if you don't want to go with freeze, your next best option is entanglement. Any form of entanglement doesn't necessarily slow them to the same degree as something like freeze would. It does allow you to stack on damage. This means your supports can come in and deal a little bit more damage than they otherwise normally would. And everybody has access to QQ, I believe. Those were your 3 primary elements to work with. I don't recommend taking in somebody like Dan Heng for these stages because yes, he's good, and yes, he can slow, but he doesn't have the ability to stop your enemy from taking turns altogether. And that's where these supports come in. That's where Silver Wolf comes in, because if you are running a team, let's say hypothetically, you're at that second half and you're running a Yanqing, it's way easier to bring in a Silver Wolf and make her weak to ice than it is to try and make your Yanqing work against an enemy who doesn't like them. This is why survivability is so important, and this is why Silver Wolf is great, because the Spiral Abyss, or Memory of Chaos as of right now, favors her. Do I recommend and would I say Lotra is necessary? No, I wouldn't, but I have other characters. I understand I'm in a position that is entirely different from a lot of you. I just don't believe as of right now he's good enough to warrant every healer and defensive unit being considered bad by comparison. Because if you have them, use them. If you have a Biden Natasha, you're set. If you have a Japard, you're set. So don't consider him a must pull. Just understand that as of right now, you need high investment characters. Let's look at my teams. For all the units I showed you, I either have the signature light cone for the 5 stars, or I have them incredibly well built. For my Zealing, she's running the full quantum set in the North South Soto. She is E2. Her stats with that is plus 15 crit rate, making it about 67. 67 over 151. We have 60 over 80. That's actually 72 because she gets an additional 12 from her light cone. We have E4, Dance Ting Yun on the guard set. Bailu, Pass Above Wandering Clouds 2-piece and Guard of Weathering Snow 2-piece. She's running Quid Pro Quo for energy regeneration. Japard, he's running Landau's Choice S5. Full-on Night set. E0. Welt, E0. Running Musketeer Wildweed. Traces 3841. Light Cone before the tutorial mission. Yanjing, this is Light Cone. Ice set. E2, Yukong, E3, Guard, Carve the Moon. My character's in a much different position than you, and my Eidolons are probably carrying my account a lot more than you have access to. So if you cannot clear it, please don't consider it a worrying issue. Instead, focus down on whatever you need to do first. This could be building out your DPSs a little bit more. This could be unlocking the final traces. Anything like that. Then focus on Memory of Chaos. If you found this video helpful or informative in any way, shape, or form, leave a like down below, and I'll see you next time. Consider joining the Discord server.